Pushing for civilian rule in Sudan. Several people have been killed and hundreds more injured in a protest organisers called a million-man march. But are the generals prepared ever to share power? And could the country slide into further turmoil? This is Inside Story. Hello again, welcome to the programme. I'm Peter Dobbie. It was the biggest protest Sudan has seen since the military junta violently broke up a sit-in in Khartoum nearly a month ago. Tens of thousands of people protested on Sunday, once again calling on the military to hand over power to civilians. Several people were killed and hundreds more were injured. The military council and the opposition have failed to reach an agreement over who should be in charge. Ethiopia and the African Union are working to bring them to the negotiating table as Sudan's military now says it's ready to resume talks. Really? We'll get the thoughts of our guests in just a moment. But first, this report from Rahila Mohammed.
Their message remains the same as it has for months, demanding Sudan's military rulers hand over power to a civilian-led government. Tens of thousands of protesters marched towards the presidential palace in Khartoum. Opposition leaders called for similar mass demonstrations nationwide, dubbed the Million-Strong March.
We don't want to feel like we stopped. We want people to feel like we will continue no matter what. Everyone is out, so we encourage each other.
In some cases, police fired tear gas at protesters. The Rapid Support Forces patrolled the streets with machine guns. They were accused of the crackdown at a sit-in at army headquarters in Khartoum on June 3rd. Around 100 protesters were killed. In the eastern town of Kassala, gunfire was heard. The military junta says it's not to blame for recent violence.
The military is here to protect protesters, but we can't do anything when it comes to infiltrators. 5 or 6 people have been hit, and we need to go there to sort out the problem. You have to know that there are infiltrators, people who want to change the current situation. But God willing, if we reach an agreement, and if you understand the situation, we will get rid of the snipers, who are killing the people right now.
Sunday's mass marches were the first since the killings in Khartoum 4 weeks ago. An internet and media blackout has been enforced since then. The protests coincide with the end of the African Union deadline for the ruling military junta to hand over power. The AU and Ethiopia have led mediation efforts to find a political solution. The opposition has accepted a plan to form a transitional government for the next 3 years. The Transitional Military Council says it's willing to negotiate. Sunday was also the 30th anniversary of the military coup led by Omar al-Bashir. Sudan's president was overthrown by another military coup in April and is in prison, charged with corruption. Activists are urging Arab countries to stop supporting Sudan's military rulers.
They will never want to relinquish power, not because they are power thirsty, but also because they're going to be implicated if they are out of power. So that's very normal and it's very natural. But we are forcing them. So unless we dry up that source, which by that mainly I'm speaking about Saudi Arabia and the UAE, then it's going to be really hard for us to make them come to succumb or be able to wedge. And I think this is changing now.
The protesters say their chants of defiance will continue despite threats to their lives until their demands for civilian rule are met. Rahila Mohammed, Al Jazeera.
There we are. Here we go. Let's bring in our guests. Joining us today in Doha, Ahmed Adam, a research associate at the School of Oriental and African Studies, part of the University of London. And joining us from Nairobi, Alan Boswell, senior analyst with the International Crisis Group. Welcome to you both. Alan Boswell in Nairobi first. Can the protesters in Sudan ever get what they want?
Well, generally, protesters don't bother going out on the streets if they are completely hopeless. Everyone was doubting the Sudanese people in December when they started this. People were doubting them in April before they toppled Bashir from power. And then also after the crackdown on June 3rd, there was more doubting that they could continue these after the violence and the internet shutdown. So I think at this point, everyone needs to recognize that while the military council does have some form of power in terms of their guns on the street and the violence they can wield, and the deep state. The protesters also have a real form of street power, and they've proven over and over again, basically, that they can make Sudan ungovernable until their demands are also met.
Ahmed, Adam, here in Doha, has the regime really gone away?
No, of course. I think the regime is still there, and I think the deep state and the counter, revolution is in full-fledged. There is no question about that. Hemeti and Burhan are the Bashir men. Actually, they are in power, and let's not forget. Actually, these people they are out of that what you call the High Supreme Committee, Security Committee, which was established by Bashir. They just replaced Bashir because Bashir for them was liability ahead to their political ambitions, and then they removed him and they just took power, and they exploited that momentum of revolution, which was carried out by the Sudanese people and peaceful demonstrators. But let's not forget that, if there is any doubt that the Sudanese people are not going to get their demands and aspiration for democratic transformation and civilian rule, yesterday was a clear answer to anyone who doubted that.
Alan, you mentioned the internet. How curtailed were the protesters, the demonstrators, when that was blocked?
Well, clearly it took them a while. Of course, the crackdown was on June 3rd. These protests happened yesterday. So it took several weeks, but they have managed to find a number of ways of continuing to communicate. Of course, there's still SMS and phone network where they can communicate, and then others have found ways of using international roaming phone networks, basically, to continue using internet. And they've also gone back to just old school organizing methods to continue organizing these protests. I was in Khartoum in the protests in early 2011, and there was a crackdown then, and actually young activists started mobilizing basically with small cells and cell groups because they realized the regime was using the electronic communications basically against them to tap in and infiltrate their networks. So it did force them to go underground and change their tactics, but I think the proof is in the pudding. These protests yesterday's were huge. They were across the country, and it's shown that this uprising, even if you cut off the internet, is going to continue because it has that large of a broad base of support among the Sudanese people. I think it's really important to recognize that the military council, their power can be overstated, and I think often has been overstated by many who just assume that they can just crack down on everyone and continue ruling that way. They have a very limited political constituency, especially in Khartoum. In some ways, their largest political constituency is actually outside Sudan, in Egypt, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. Whether or not they can move forward without having really a popular basis, I think is the key question. And they've been trying to wiggle their way back and forward to hang on to power. But I think, these continued demonstrations from the Sudanese people just show what they're going up against. And that shouldn't be underestimated, both in terms of Sudanese resolve, but also just in terms of the real power and strength that the Sudanese people have at the moment.
We've also now been joined from Shanghai by Ali Verji, visiting researcher at the United States Institute of Peace. Welcome to you, Ali Verji. There is, in theory, the beginnings, an embryo of some sort of framework that's been put together by the African Union and Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Prime Minister is front and center in this. He's local, he's there, he's next door, almost. Is there anything in there that would suggest to you there is a grain of positivity here?
Well, actually, Prime Minister Abiy is not as front and center as we might always hope. He has an envoy who is largely doing the work, and that's an indication of just how much Abiy has to do himself, both at home and abroad. But I think the proposal that has been developed by the African Union and the Ethiopian mediators, in some sense, it's positive because it demonstrates that there are things that can be negotiated and agreed. In another sense, it's a sideshow because it hasn't fundamentally changed the structural realities of both the protests and of the council, the military council's response. So there are some good principles in there, but it doesn't necessarily address how the military and the security sector will be removed from state control, not only in Khartoum, but also in all of Sudan's states, which are led by military governors at the moment and where most of Sudanese live. And that's really, therefore, in some sense, a much more important question for the future governance. And so far, the Ethiopian and African Union mediation hasn't really been able to get beyond the structures and the powers and the numbers of any transitional authorities in Khartoum. Let's also remember that this is only a means to an end. The transitional administration is not supposed to be there for a very long period of time. We're talking about 2 or 3 or 4 years is the numbers that have been tossed around. But that is a transition to something. And that's really, again, a question of, can that really be achieved, and what does that transition look like? And maybe the mediation isn't there now, but certainly for most Sudanese, it's not simply about having a long period of uncertainty leading to more misgovernance and mismanagement, but something that looks a lot more positive and a lot more in terms of the future aspirations of all of Sudan's citizens.
Ahmed, Adam, here in Doha, is what we're seeing just over the past 48, 56 hours or so, could it be the beginnings of the country sliding back to where it was, not just at the beginning of this year when the protests initially kicked off, but further back than that?
I think I'm a bit optimistic, actually, because the Sudanese people are very aware of the consequences of any kind of confrontation or any kind of, chaos in their country. And I think they learn also, from the mistakes and from the cases in the region, like, in Yemen and also in Libya and all these kind of cases. So that's why they stick to the issue and they stick to the method and means of, peaceful demonstrations all the way. They just stick to that, slogan and stick to that actually behavior and practice on the ground, regardless actually and despite the bloody crackdown from the military junta. And I think Sudanese are very aware. And also I would like to assure you that actually, the Sudanese people are very determined actually to achieve and to realize their revolutionary aspiration actually for democratic transformation and for civilian rule. Yesterday also was many messages actually. There was a message actually to the military junta that they cannot actually, continue in power, and the people of Sudan, they will never surrender actually to their, bloody crackdown and bloody tactics. And also it was a real, pressure, a message also to the forces of freedom and change. They tell them that you will never surrender and you will never also concede to any kind of concession which can, empower the and embolden the military junta and their counter-revolution. Also, it was very clear message to the Ethiopian and African mediators that actually, their framework is not going to work after yesterday because the expectations are very high and the aspirations of people of Sudan are very high, and they will never accept any kind of framework or any kind of initiative that actually want to strengthen the status quo and the counter-revolution led by Hemeti and Burhan. So the message was very clear, and Sudanese people are so determined to go ahead with that, regardless of the bloody crackdown. And if you can say that, yesterday, Hemeti and the others are so scared, actually, from the power of the revolution and the power of people of Sudan.
Alan, do you share that optimism? Because it occurs to me, if you've got a percentage of what you might call the administration at the moment, a cornerstone of the administration, a percentage of that is made up of what used to be the Janjaweed militia. They are notorious. How can the country ever truly calm down if those people, okay, it's just a clutch of people, it's just a handful, but if they're still there doing their thing and wanting to do their thing, the direction of travel here is what?
I mean, without question, the Hemeti problem, as I call it, in terms of the militia that Hemeti now controls, that used to be the Janjaweed and is now the Rapid Support Forces. This is now the biggest obstacle to moving forward. I mean, it's difficult to see how you move forward with Hemeti, given his background, given that he's basically seen as a thuggish provincial warlord by many, even in Khartoum. But also just the violence he's already used against civilians, and the fact that he really doesn't have a political constituency in Khartoum. But then again, it's difficult to see how you move on without him because he is right now the strongest force on the ground in the streets. And there's still no clear pathway towards just getting him, but not only him, but all the guys who he has underneath him to simply go away. I mean, per Ollie's point that, the mediation efforts, are producing a draft agreement that leaves a lot wanting, which is of course true. I mean, I think everyone has to acknowledge that this is going to be an incredibly messy transition in a best case scenario. And we've already mentioned how strong the Sudanese people have shown themselves to be. But Bashir has left this country in really dire straits, not only with the economy, but also the security services were taking up something like 60% of the budget. He counterbalanced them against each other. This is something that will need unwinding. I think it's unreasonable probably to expect that you flip a switch and everything changes and the militias completely demobilize all at once. So I think there is a path forward, but it's going to be one that likely includes many of the actors for a transitional period. And I think that's, in many ways, just the clear path forward, but also really about the only clear path forward.
Ali Verji in Shanghai. Why has the ruling military council done a deal with a Canadian lobbying company? They've given them, we understand, reportedly $6 million because they want to lobby, particularly with the Trump administration, we understand, i.e. they want to implicitly legitimize themselves and also get access to diplomatic oomph and maybe arms as well. That is not signaling we are going to hand over to a civilian administration anytime soon.
No, it certainly isn't. And the point I would make about the Transitional Military Council is that in some respects it also represents generational change. There's been a lot said about the youth of the protesters and the movement of Sudan's young people. That is to some extent matched by people like Hemeti, who is in his 40s, a young man, if you compare him to Bashir's generation in their mid-70s and early 80s, some of them. So this transition of generational rule is also something where a lot of these people have been waiting their turn, so to speak, to take over. And I agree that signing these kind of contracts and contracting these sorts of lobbyists is indicative of that aspiration. I'm not sure the actual substance of the agreement is really what matters because, of course, it's debatable whether any lobbyist could deliver arms and normalization with the Trump administration and so on. It's much more revealing for me in terms of what it indicates about the mentality and the aspirations of the military council. That said, of course, there is a very clear knowledge amongst the military council that the Bashir regime had been engaged in this normalization process with the United States. And although it might seem inconceivable now, where there are large-scale crackdowns and other mass protests going on, where the regime that's in place now is perpetrating this widespread violence, there is, again, in the longer term or the medium term, that aspiration to resume some sort of normalization, both with the United States and more broadly.
But Ahmed, here in Doha, when you get a former US congressman, James Moran, I think was his name, who made a trip to Sudan, he left that trip saying he'd had many positive conversations with everyone involved in this low-level rumbling conflict that's now, in this current sort of form, has been going on since the beginning of this year. He either has had genuinely positive conversations or he doesn't understand what he's dealing with. It can't be both.
Maybe both, and maybe also he's advancing his own personal interest. But let's not forget that actually he's not like a heavyweight kind of congressman or something like that. We know the real congressmen actually at the U.S. Congress, they are doing a great job in supporting the revolution and democratic transformation and the peaceful revolution in the country. And I think our people, they held their effort and actually they paid their effort, great deal. But also, yes, I would like to get back to the issue of Hemeti and the militia of Janjaweed. Please, when we discuss, Hemeti and discuss actually his militia, Janjaweed militia, let's not forget actually the Security Council resolution which actually issued to address, the issue of Janjaweed. Let's not forget Resolution 1556 under Chapter 7, which demands the government of Sudan at that time to disband and to disarm and to bring the Janjaweed militia to justice. So instead of appeasing them, I think we should, the international community and the peace-loving countries, actually, they should impose the Security Council resolutions about the Janjaweed. And I think that right now, they have the Sudanese people, they are changing the equation of power in the ground. They are actually, protesting in millions actually peacefully, and they are actually, confronting and defying the Janjaweed militia and their role. I think the international community should stand with Sudanese people, because Sudanese people, they will never accept and they will never surrender to Hemeti and his people. And also there is another thing also, way out of this. I think the international community, especially the regional, the African Union and the others, they should pressure on the council and Hemeti backers in the region. We know that actually Saudi Arabia is supporting Hemeti. We know United Arab Emirates and other countries as well. I think the international community should have sustained pressure on Hemeti backers so that, to behave in a way that to hand over the power to civilians. Hemeti can respond to sustained pressure, definitely, because
Understood. Ahmed, I'm going to interrupt you because we're kind of trotting towards the end of our time. Alan, on that idea of the Arab countries, point number one, is it possible to get those Arab countries that Ahmed Adam here in Doha is talking about to dial back on their involvement? And if it is possible, would that take some of the temperature out of where we are at the moment?
Without question, the key point of leverage that we at Crisis Group have identified with the military council involves their outside backers. And that's Cairo, but it's more importantly the Emiratis and the Saudis. And we do think it's incredibly critical that those countries pressure the military council, including Hemeti, to strike a deal with the opposition for a path forward. The Gulf countries claim that what they want in Sudan is stability, and if they think they're going to get stability by the military council cracking down and trying to hold on to power through repression, we think they'll be sorely mistaken. So, there's been some efforts at trying to talk to the Gulf more closely about this and strongly about this. And those efforts need to be increased, and they need to continue. But I think this is clearly one of the most important routes moving forward.
Ali Verji in Shanghai, to flip around something you were saying at the top of our discussion, is there a sense in which the military are still calling all the shots here? Because, can I suggest to you, the protesters have to, by definition, keep the military invested and engaged in what may yet become a peace process, because if they walk away, nothing changes, nothing will change.
Well, I think the protesters feel they can pressure the military through non-participation as well. And as you know, at the moment, there aren't direct talks between both sides. So it's a bit of brinkmanship on both sides, because on the one hand, you have the protesters saying, these are our demands and we will accept nothing less. The military saying, well, these are infiltrators and it's vandals and all the nonsensical things that they've said, and continuing as they are. And I think the difficulty for the protesters is that if you have a counterpart in the military council that is not responsive to non-violent civil disobedience, then what do you do? And the variety of tactics that the protesters have employed over the last months have been varied, and I'm sure they will continue to be varied. But are they putting pressure on the military council in the sense of feeling we need to do something to stop this happening again?
Okay, I'm going to stop you there, Ali. Last point to Ahmed Adam here in Doha. Ahmed Adam, in 30 seconds, no one can question the commitment of the protesters. You're clear in your own mind that they are still committed. But are they, in effect, back at square one? Are they back to where they were in January, February?
Yes, definitely. I think now there is a new phase of this, protest, and I think there is some plans actually, especially from the grassroots, committees actually all over the country, and you can see the consensus across the country that despite the internet, this connection, all this kind of thing, but it's still people are determined, and they establish some sort of harmonization to continue this protest to the end, because they don't want half revolution and counter revolution actually to succeed, and they are very clear on that. And if you can see that Hemeti yesterday and and Burhan, after this huge protest, they demanded and they contacted the Ethiopian mediators to intervene, because for tactical reasons they want to ease the tension and to ease actually the protest yesterday. But I think people of Sudan are determined to go ahead with their revolution, definitely.
Gentlemen, thank you all for an informative debate. We do appreciate your time. Thank you to our guests. They were Ahmed Adam, Alan Boswell and Ali Verji. Thank you to you too for your company. You can see the show again on the website, that's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also talk to us on Twitter at AJ Inside Story or tweet me, I'll tweet back. I'm at Peter Dobbie1 from me, Peter Dobbie, and everyone on the team here in Doha. Thanks for watching. I will see you very soon. Bye-bye.